So for those of you who moderated a discussion on Zoom, it can be very exciting. And so here's some guidance that we've put together for how we're going to work this discussion with now about 25 participants. So we are looking for comments, suggestions, ideas, and questions. We want you to recognize that you can ask questions that we may not be able to answer, but we will take them to our subcommittees and make sure we get answers to them over time. The way we're going to work on this is to have you raise your virtual hand. The advantage of raising your virtual hand, and I am not seeing my virtual hand here, Sean. I don't know if that's going to work today. Oh, I guess other people shouldn't.
That's because you're a co-host. Everybody else can.
Yes, yes. So there's, on the bottom, if you click on the participants thing and you see the names at the bottom, there should be a hand raised. If you raise your hand, the good news about that is it puts your hands up in order. I will call on people in order. I hope we will get to everybody who has a question. I also kind of hope that we don't, and then welcome to email us your questions or comments or anything you don't want to talk about here. Our emails are there. They're also in the At the U article. And if you write Harriet, it pretty much just autofills to me with my weird HSC address. So we have a hand up already. I'm very excited. Sean can pull that down now. And Joe Yaffe, what is your question, comment, or discussion point?
I'm so glad you're doing this. This is an issue that I've been really critically involved in for probably 6 or 7 years. So at one point in time, we actually tried to foster use by faculty of open access. And we had a fund that was delivered by the SVPAA, that basically people said, here's where I want to apply for the grant, and we did that. We were also simultaneously encouraging people to make sure to write their publishing fees into their grants. That has gone nowhere at all, and that fund dried up a long time ago. So I took it that we didn't really have a commitment, and that largely came from the health sciences side, discouraging us from engaging in open access. And there was a lot of history there, and I understand wanting to support the publishers because they do provide a value-added service. So I get that, but at the same time, the Elsevier in particular has been a problem. I think the Taylor and Francis is getting to be almost as much of a problem, and it's going to price us right out. 2, I want to know how much we're spending on interlibrary loan. What can we do to develop consortia with other universities? Maybe different kinds of consortia depending on topic areas, where we can have universities basically say, okay, we're going to be the repository for this kind of journal, and we will provide on a cost-sharing basis access to this kind of journal. So how much are we actually spending on interlibrary loan? It runs differently for the 2 different libraries, I think. At least it was at one point in time. So it would be interesting to know whether that's still the case. And 3, I'm totally committed to working on this. So if I can volunteer on this issue around the journals and what to do about it, it's very important to me. I'm a systematic reviewer. I use literally hundreds of journals. So and I'm a huge user of interlibrary loan, and I'm totally grateful to them for the service that they provide me, which is incredible. I do sometimes have to buy my own dissertations, but otherwise they get everything for me for free. It doesn't cost me anything, and I couldn't do my work without them. That's it.
Joe, I know I can always count on you to have comments, and thank you. So first, I think we will be reaching out to you to get more information, I think, on what went well and what didn't go well in the open access attempt. It's true, I come from health sciences, and Open access has lots of good things about it. It starts from a very idealistic place, and then it turns out open access journals probably have lower journalistic standards because they have to publish or perish, or at least in the health sciences, not necessarily everywhere. And predatory journals have been problematic, right? That open access has opened up people publishing in journals that don't really exist, and then the journal owns the copyright, and now it has no value to their CV and they can't promote it. So, and we're not going to talk about promotions at the moment, I think. So I think that's really useful to know about. We need to get your information, and thank you for volunteering. We'll see how we can use you. I think the idea of, so the questions about interlibrary loans. So here's some data. Currently, under the subscriptions, we have about 11 million downloads a year across our campus at a cost of $30 to $50 per article, which is what most of these publishers charge. Obviously, that would be $30 to $40 million to do it that way. Interlibrary loan all does cost money. There is a staff member who staffs it to make sure it happens. And then there's actually a fee between institutions to do that. Interestingly enough, there was a question about how's the UC system doing. They canceled Elsevier. It turns out they probably aren't feeling the effects of it much yet because there's only 1 year of data that they don't have access to. It's also interesting to note that on the day they canceled it, the director of all the libraries sent out an email to all the libraries across the United States saying, hey, can you put us on the top of your interlibrary loan list? Which highlights the sort of zero-sum game of this, that if you want to be the first person out, not the last person out, right? The idea of, can we have people in consortia who own pieces of the subscription? The journals have been pretty good at preventing sort of co-ownership of subscriptions. There are consortia, and for example, and I think Richard talked a little bit about these, Florida has the Florida State Universities, Texas has had some universities band together. The UC system obviously has banded together. We are part of the Utah Library Consortium. The one challenge for that for us is that we are the big library, the big R1 library in that group. And so there's sort of limits that there's also a Western Libraries Consortium, and we participate in that. The Pac-12 is an obvious place to have consortia, but because of the dominance of the California schools, that has not really been a possibility. We are, one of the things that's under consideration and discussion in our subcommittee is, what are the other places we could ally with as to build up consortia? It doesn't have to be geographic anymore, right? It could be something broader. So I think the idea of consortia is a really good idea. And the publishing companies are fighting hard. So, I mean, because you kind of go, why doesn't everybody just become a consortium and share? And the answer is because they're not really letting that happen. So I don't know if that answers everything, but yes, you brought up some great ideas that I've written down for the future. Interlibrary loan is really important. One of the things to consider, however, is that if we cancel the subscriptions, and now we're relying on interlibrary loan, we're going to have to staff up interlibrary loan. So almost all of these options for reducing our reliance on subscription has other costs. So if it's open access, now we have to somehow support the open access. If it's interlibrary loan, we have to increase support for interlibrary loan. It would be nice if that could be more automated and cheaper. Joe, you have your hand up again.
Yes, because interlibrary loan and staffing it up, even if we bought them a whole bunch of people to work there, would be a hell of a lot cheaper than some of these journals.
That is true, absolutely true. But
So
then we're also reliant on people still having the journals for us to interlibrary loan with.
Right.
But yes, interlibrary loan is a great opportunity. I will say we have a comment in here from earlier that I'm not sure an answer, but we'll bring it. Oh, that was the, yes. Have there been successful restructures from which you may glean ideas and best practices? And that is absolutely something that the task force as a whole is doing, and that each subcommittee is doing. Is the library has been really useful in sending us articles and resources. One of the issues is things like UC canceling Elsevier. We don't know the results of it yet. So we kind of know what they did. We know what they are doing about it. There's not a lot of data on how it's affected faculty, staff, and students. And for me, I think one of the key things is whatever we do, We can't have a multi-tiered system where there's some people who have good access and other people who are likely to be students who can't access. So it's a complicated story, and yes, we are looking for best practices. Ben.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my basement. A couple things. First, I just want to say thanks to Richard and Harriet, especially for doing this work. I see you. I really value the work that you're doing. My thanks also to the other members of the committee. Also, I think, Richard made a great point that we should all really give our deep thanks to the library, not just for the way they've come through during the pandemic, but for the daily work which they provide to all of us across the university community. I'm a scholar, a historian of India and South Asia, and so I rely on Interlibrary alone, especially so deeply for books at other libraries and archives around the country. And then they bring it to my office, which is just delightful. And I want to give a shout out to the people who provide that kind of service. Just a couple quick things. First, I think that, one of the places I'd urge the committee to look at the finances around, one might be this business of food service. I'm not sure the library should be in food service. And when the library expanded its food service offerings, food brings bugs and food brings liquid and other things that don't go well with books and paper. And so if it's the only place that you can eat at a certain point on campus, maybe people should pay for that. Like maybe there's something to be done there. Another point is the press, the university press. I know a while ago, I think the press was moved into the library, but the press is a business. We have a fantastic business school here, and maybe the press should not be housed in the library. Maybe it should move somewhere else, because ultimately it's about markets, it's about advertising, it's about finding out what's hot and what's not. Faculty can help with that part, but the leadership of the press and the idea of the press might be better suited not in a library. You think, oh, well, a press makes books and the library has books, but I'm not sure those two go together. I've heard through the grapevine that the press is struggling, and I'm sorry to hear that. I think a great university should have a great press, but I would encourage the committee to think about restructuring where the press is and maybe rethinking its leadership and how it works. The biggest point I want to make, and then I'll shut up, is that libraries are representative, and representation matters. And when we have students and faculty that go to the library and do not see their stories, their histories, their literatures, who they are represented on the shelves because we've stopped buying books, or they can't find journals that cover particular parts of the area because they're not heavily subscribed to, I think diversity and inclusion die from another cut. They die from a lot of cuts. And I think when the library shrinks its inclusivity and its diversity in terms of its collection and its collecting practices, that's problematic. That's really problematic. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you again, both of you. You don't have to respond. You can just pass it up the line. Thank you.
I will quickly respond by saying that the idea of food services is a big one. And one of the things that the Marriott Library has done is when there's a gap in coverage, they reach out to fill it, like computers and food. And the question is who should be doing that and how should it be funded? And that is definitely on the agenda for discussion. I think that the diversity and inclusion component is really important as part of why it's so important to make sure the library is a happy going concern. And Richard, I didn't give you a chance to talk last time, so do you have comments?
Oh, no, that's okay. I mean, I think Ben spoke really eloquently, and not much needs to be added to that, except I love the argument for thinking about collections, not just from a utilitarian standpoint, and certainly not evaluating their necessity from a bean counting standpoint. I mean, they're symbolic acts of self-representation of what does this university value, what do we look like? And I think that's something I agree with and care deeply about. The idea of relocating the university press is a provocative one. It's interesting. It's certainly an option to consider. I worry though about housing it somewhere, that will only look at the its profitability, because university presses, again, sort of like collections, might not always be profit centers. But I think that's also a very useful suggestion. We're going to look into that.
And Summer has a discussion about that's really important about traditional services. Like, I know, Ben, you're worried about the books and papers. I'm not sure there are hardly any left in the libraries. And so that has changed things a lot. The libraries really think about themselves as owners of content available to people who need to use it. And obviously what's changed over the years is content used to be books, and now it's things, as were pointed out by Summer, like virtual reality and 3D printing. And then the question is, when does that content exceed the content that libraries should be providing? And also, how do you stay flexible so that in the future you're there for the next wave and we're not still selling VHS equipment? I love all these comments, but I'm going to go to Alan Rogers next for his comment and question.
Thank you. The sort of summary of the comment I want to make is that I think this issue is actually bigger than the library. At least the issue involving the spiraling costs of subscriptions. And the reason is that there are already technical solutions to this problem. We can already post on preprint servers for free. And then there are institutions like Peer Community and Evolutionary Biology as an example of a thing that isn't a journal, doesn't publish anything, but provides peer review for free. The editors are working for free in the same way that reviewers of academic journals work for free. And then they produce things on their websites that provide peer review and kind of give you they provide, if you pass their peer review, then you get to say that your paper is accepted by peer review in evolutionary biology, and it should have the same credentialing function as any other academic journal, but it's all free. So all of that exists now. There isn't any reason why academic publishing has to be expensive, except for the fact that when we go up for tenure, which I'm way beyond now, tenure committees and outside reviewers and all that pay attention to the prestige of the outlet in which the junior faculty member is publishing. If we changed that, if the university as a whole said, peer community and evolutionary biology will count towards tenure the same way nature does, then people would be more inclined to publish in those outlets. There would be less demand for articles in the expensive journals, and libraries wouldn't be in such a spot. So my view is this ought to be a conversation that's larger than the one we're having. It ought to include not just the library, but also universities and departments and everyone that's in charge with tenure decisions.
I agree. We have not been empowered to do that. I do think that that is something that should be incorporated in our report. And so thank you for sharing that. Jay, you are next.
Yeah, let me echo my the thanks I've heard expressed to you, to the members of the committee, and also to the library. I mean, I've been really impressed by the way the library has come in to fill a number of the gaps that you all have pointed out. That's been a real bright spot. I will say that last year I got myself into a little bit of a spot of trouble with the library. I'll tell you all a quick story. I'm a former chair of our small Department of Writing and Rhetoric Studies, and had kind of been back and forth with the library about the space of the Writing Center, which is, I think we've benefited, students have benefited from having it there. You know, one of the reasons why the library seems to be taking on all of these roles is frankly because of where it's located on campus, you know, and it makes sense. And I have appreciated that. I think students have as well. I've sent, I don't know how many students to the Knowledge Commons, you know, with a variety of questions, for example. And I think the Writing Center is at and beyond capacity, has been for at least the last 5 years because of where it's located. But, you know, we were kind of in a back and forth about, well, can we get some more space? And they would say, well, we don't really have the space. And that had been something that was kind of an irritant. Last year, it was last fall, right around now, I had occasion to be down in the library and walked by the Writing Center and peeked in just to check on how things were going. And then I walked into the proto space, as it was called. It may still be called that, next to where the Digital Matters Lab exists. It's a huge area on the second floor of the library that used to be part of the open stacks and was converted into a space that seemed at the time anyway to be in transition. You know, what I saw was a bank of about 10, I think 3 printers, a couple of virtual reality setups, and then a really big chasm of space against the, you know, on the far wall there, with 3 or 4 screens set up that had gaming equipment attached to them. And there were probably pods of somewhere between 6 and 8 students, presumably, playing at each one of them. One of the things that stood out to me, and this has to do with, I think this is tied to space allocation, and I was one of the people who asked that question earlier before the meeting, but also representation, you know, part of the point that I think Ben was raising. What I noticed was that overwhelmingly, and this was, you know, just on a pass through, but the director of the Writing Center kind of backed me up on this, and so did a couple of other people. The students who were by and large using the Writing Center were students who were, as is often the case, second language writers in English, and or students of color, underrepresented students. By and large, during that pass through, the students who were playing the games were overwhelmingly white and male. And again, that's anecdotal, but I was just in exactly the wrong mood that day, and I tweeted about it. And within probably, I would say, 3 minutes of my sending that tweet, the public relations office at the library, which I didn't know existed before that moment, contacted the director of the Writing Center, who did not send the tweet, and took her to task for what I had done. And I was up in arms at that point. And, you know, I got a call from Catherine Zahner and let her know that this is why I did what I did, and that I would not apologize for it, because I had had a number of meetings with the library. And anyway, things kind of went back and forth from there. I ended up having a very civil conversation with Catherine, and she let me know that there was an ongoing audit of the space in the library, and that a number of things were being looked at. The Knowledge Commons, for example. There are a lot of computers. There are a lot of computers around campus that are, you know, even if they are new computers, they don't really make a lot of sense for the vast and increasing numbers of students who are walking around with their own devices. It's continued to be a bit of a mystery to me why we invest the amounts of money in static computer labs with locked down, you know, personal computers that we invested in. Catherine was aware of that and said, yeah, that's one of the things that we're looking at, is how to reuse that space. But unfortunately, you know, shortly after, fast forward to spring semester, obviously the pandemic happened, and everyone knows what happened as a result of that. So that hasn't, I think, really gone anywhere. I'm raising that issue just to suggest that, you know, questions about serials, for example, are, as you all know quite well, part of a larger, and I would not want to be one who would just kind of come in and say, all right, let's do this audit of the library for you because it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. But I just do wonder, I'm not coming to a question or suggestion about this, I just wonder about other priorities in the library, and the possibility of reallocating space and resources. I think that's really something that this committee should certainly highlight, you know, that it seems as if experiments have been undertaken at extending some of those services that really haven't seemed to pay off, particularly if we are talking, for example, about the costs of serials, which are at the core of our academic mission, while at the same time, there are areas in the library that just don't, you know, they seem contradictory or seem out of keeping with those core missions. So I just wanted to get on that soapbox for a second.
Jay, thank you for your soapbox. I will say all of this is part of what's being looked at. And one of the reasons that we want a very broad input from people across campus is, I think, figuring out who uses what and what's important to whom. Because I think one of the things that's been brought up in a previous town hall is it's not that you need to have the journal that everybody uses. There might be only 2 or 3 people that use something, but it's critical for their work. Like Ben talked about the types of books that need to be on the shelf for representation, and I agree with that. So I think it's a complicated story, and it is definitely front and center in the work that we're doing. I think probably we can get at least one more question in, or comment. So John, Wynn,
Well, actually,
unless
just
Richard,
before,
you want to say something? Sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to respond super briefly to what you said. Jay said, that might be getting to a point where like it's probably not a resource that students need to be supplied with, but just my initial reaction. Anyway, let's move on to John.
Hello, I'm John Wynn. I'm a classics scholar, relevant background. So I had 3 points that I'll keep them really brief because I think I know we're getting to the end of the time. The first is, yes, librarians are my heroes. So I agree with what everyone has said about that. Although I understand the need to take a stand against the subscription price crisis, and I think behind taking a stand, I wonder if the result of your deliberations is that the right solution would be to increase the library's budget, or dramatically increase the library's budget, build a bigger and better library. Is that something that would be within your remit to recommend? So that was the first point. The second point is, I'm in my field, books are very important. An awful lot of my reading is books, both very old books and also very new, up to the minute books. So I've really been feeling the lack of books. And in fact, I thought I was paranoid. I thought, it seems like they're not buying any books, but that can't be true. That would be insane. So now I learned that. So now I hear that the library isn't buying books except on demand. So, I mean, that should be a 5-alarm fire for the future of civilization. And I understand that except on demand is a big except. It doesn't mean no more books, but it does mean that it's up to me and people in fields like mine to almost be our own subject librarians. It's our responsibility to maintain a good collection in our fields. And that used to be like a full-time job. So that's a big tax on my time. And if any time I need to look something up, even just quickly, I'm very often, it's not going to be there for me to look at. I have to ask for it to be bought. I have to interlibrary loan it. That poses a serious stumbling block to my life, my career. So I hope that buying books and also having people within the library who are able to at least maintain a background collection in the areas where we support research would be something that you would look into. And then my third point, paper books are still very important in my field. So if those are disappearing from the library, that's a disaster for me. Old books, which I need to be able to check in the original, but also many books that aren't available digitally, even now under HathiTrust, and may I presume like go back behind the paywall digitally after COVID. And sometimes there need to be gaps in the collection that are filled and so on. So the presence of paper books in the library is important to me research-wise. And I would also like to say, I think it's very important to many people, the presence of paper books. When Ben said, how do we represent ourselves? He said, what do you see in the stacks? And I think that that's not just a turn of phrase. And I know that a lot of students you say it's only available digitally, and they groan in class. They like to be able to, especially if they're reading carefully, they like a book, as us dinosaurs think of it. But they do too, right? And also very often when they have questions, they don't want you to send them to some journal article. They want a book that they can read about something they're interested in. So I would say books in general of any kind are very important, and that must be remedied, in my opinion, for me and many people like me at Rusty. And two, don't forget about paper books, please.
That is an excellent point. You'll note that Richard and I both have paper books behind us on our screens, not entirely by accident. Real bookshelves in our real houses, though possibly photos of them in some of our cases. So I think it's a really important question. I will also say having books available in multiple versions is important, because I know students who really can only absorb the content with audible books, or not the, but, or prefer a digital version because their computer can read it to them, or because then they have it with them wherever they go and it's not hard to carry around. So there's lots of different ideas. It would be nice, I see from Jay, it would be nice if books were much more usable when they are ebooks. There's no doubt about that. So yes, I think this books topic is great. I know, Richard, you could talk about books for 3 hours, but do you want to make a comment on books?
Not beyond just saying that, John, of course, I share your perspective because I'm in a neighboring discipline. I think physical books provide research methods that, electronic ones don't. I mean, I think if you don't have the physical books there in the library, you lose entirely the element of research, of just serendipitous discovery, of just, finding books that are adjacent to each other. If you have to know in advance what book you're looking for, it, as you were saying, it displaces a lot of extra research workload onto you, dramatically increases the amount of wait time that you're doing for books. So it sort of punishes people who work in paper-based disciplines. But to your first question about budgets, yes, it is actually within our remit to just think globally about the way the library budget is structured, and to find ways of tying it to larger pots of money if possible. I think it's almost inconceivable to me that we would not, at the end of this process, recommend that library budgets be dramatically increased, no matter what. So yeah.
But we don't want to dramatically increase them just to cover the cost of cereals,
Exactly.
right? There's two
Right.
pieces here.
Because then you're just paying ransom money. Yeah.
I recognize we're over. I appreciate people staying. We are happy to stay. I will say I want to highlight a comment from Summer that's in the chat about distance-based students and preceptors and the importance of library references to them. And I think what this highlights is we need books, and we need maybe not Xboxes. I will say that question came from a student majoring in gaming. And if we're going to be the #1 gaming department in the country, which we are, we may need better access. Or you could say, well, maybe they need to provide that access to their students, right? So, but even though we need real hardcover books, we also need to be having digital access as well, and figuring out ways to improve digital access. So we just want the library to do everything. And so that's just a small task that doesn't take any budget, right? So are there any burning questions or comments that anyone wants to share? I will say, please email us. I am so appreciative of all the ideas. I've been taking notes furiously. I think a lot of these things have come up before, but you've really brought up different versions of the things that we've thought about, and some new ideas to sort of think about what to do with things, and also represented extremely well how you use book. I noticed that we're very humanities heavy, at least in the faces on the screen today. And I do love humanities because Ben is now the chair for my kid who's in grad school. And, also just recognizing the various ways people use libraries on campus, and how important it is to make sure we take all of those into account as we're thinking about what's the futures of the libraries look like.
I've actually got to hop off in a moment and go pick up a kid from school, but I would just second what Harriet's saying. This is just the beginning of a conversation. You all have been wonderfully vocal and thoughtful and insightful, and we want to just hear more of this. This really only works if we crowdsource it as much as possible. So if you have any further topics you want to discuss with us, email us. It could be at 3 in the morning. One of us is probably going to be up then. Come to the next town hall. You can come halfway through when I'm finished with my opening spiel, and you can just resume the discussion then. We'd welcome having you back. Tell everybody else to attend them as well. This should be a collective conversation.
And especially your students, please.
Yes.
I know you see so much of them now. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Richard, go do your parenting thing. I will stick around for a few more minutes if anybody else wants to say anything, but otherwise I just have to say thank you all so much for showing up and giving us your input.
Thank you again for
Thanks all.
hosting this discussion.
Thank you.
Is there any prospect of broadening this discussion to include the whatever university committees would be involved in tenure decisions?
Well,
That's so decentralized that I'm not, I think it has to be taken college by college and department by department, because
it's so
the
different.
history of this university is a decentralization of tenure decisions.
I know that we recently had to redo our RPT standards. And the reason we did was because we got some kind of mandate that was passed down from somewhere higher in either in the college or the university. So there apparently is some centralized control over these RPT standards. And if that centralized control could if at that level you could institute the sort of policy I was talking about, then you could make a difference.
I will say, having led the revision of the School of Medicine faculty appointment review and advancement guidelines for tenure line and career line faculty about 6 years ago, it's a very complicated proposition, and there are lots of things that go into it. And I think the reliance on things like impact factor frustrates me. And one of the reasons it's so attractive is because everybody knows what it means. They might know what it means and it doesn't actually mean that, but, and it's much harder to pin down, especially with predatory journals, what all that means. So it really does, in a way, be departmental, because you need people who are experts in which of these actually does do peer review, and which of these are actually read, right? It's not just about, is there good peer review? It's about, does it actually have any effect on people? So it's a great question. We certainly have lots of people who are interested on our committees, subcommittees, and on the task force, and we'll just see how that could represent itself in the library task force report.
Thank you all. I'm going to sign off.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for hosting this, Harriet.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for coming.
All right.